The alpha rejected his Luna for giving him daughters. Years later, his sons brought him shame. 5 daughters. 5. What will the pack say about me? How will my bloodline stand? You have given me nothing. From tonight, you and those girls will live at the outpost at the edge of the dead zone, until I find a mate worthy of carrying my name. She was cast into a blizzard for the crime of bearing daughters. But what came after silenced every wolf in Silver Ridge for generations. If your fated mate threw you and your children into the freezing snow because they were not the sons he wanted, would you answer his howl when his precious heirs left him bleeding in that same snow? Long ago, before the highways carved through Montana's high country, in a frost-bitten wolf territory so ancient, the elders claimed the mountain itself had a heartbeat, there lived a Luna named Hélène Lucier. Her name meant light in the old tongue. Richard chose her at a territory summit when she was 19. Their mating ceremony lasted 3 days. Elder wolves wept, not from sentiment, but from recognition. A fated bond that deep only happens once in a generation. Nobody in Silver Ridge saw what was coming, not even Hélène. Richard Lucier had never been a man who needed anything twice. He made decisions the way the mountain made snow. Quietly, completely, without asking permission. At 24, he was already the youngest Alpha Silver Ridge had produced in 4 generations. The pack elders did not celebrate this. They simply accepted it, the way you accept weather. Dear Richard was what the territory needed, and the territory knew it before he did. He found Hélène at the autumn summit, standing at the edge of a fire she had not started, warming her hands like she belonged there. He stopped walking. That was the whole story, really. Richard Lucier, the man who had never needed anything twice, stopped walking and did not start again until she looked up. Their mating ceremony lasted 3 days. The whole pack came. Even the Black Ridge Wolves sent a delegation, which nobody could remember happening before. Elder Marta, 91 years old, half-blind, had attended more matings than she could count, stood at the back of the great hall and said to no one in particular, "That bond will either save this pack or teach it something it cannot unlearn." Nobody wrote it down. They should have. The early years were the kind people describe in the wrong tense, as though they happened to someone else. Hélène learned every pack member's name within her first week. Not just the wolves, the children too. She remembered their birthdays, their injuries, the names of their lost mates. Richard watched her do this and felt something loosen in his chest that he had not known was tight. The prophecy came from Elder Marta, 3 months into their mating. Delivered at dawn, quiet as a blade. Their daughters will decide the fate of Silver Ridge. Richard heard it, smiled. He thought she meant sons. The first daughter arrived in February, during the worst snowstorm Silver Ridge had seen in 11 years. Richard was outside when the midwife appeared in the doorway. So he had been pacing the courtyard for 6 hours, which the pack found endearing because alphas did not pace. Alphas waited, but Richard had apparently not received that instruction. He stopped pacing the moment he saw the midwife's face. "A girl," she said. "Healthy, perfect." He went inside immediately, held the baby with both hands like she was something the mountain had personally delivered, named her Isla, told Hélène she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen in his life, and Richard Lucier did not say things he did not mean. For approximately 4 months, everything was fine. Then the whispering started. Low at first, the kind you feel before you hear. Pack members chose certain silences when Richard walked past. Elder conversations that stopped 1 beat too early. Nothing Richard could point to. Nothing Hélène could name. just the slow, creeping awareness that Silver Ridge was doing arithmetic, and the answer was making people nervous. The second daughter came 14 months later, Clara. Born at sunrise, eyes already open, which the midwife said she had never seen before. Helene thought it was a sign. She was right, just not the sign she was hoping for. That evening, Richard sat at the head of the pack table and said nothing for a very long time. He was not unkind. He held Clara. He smiled when the pack came to see her. But Elder Marta watched him from across the room and said quietly to the woman beside her, "The frost is starting." 2 daughters, no sons, and a territory that had not been led by a female bloodline in living memory. The pack began to count. The third daughter was born during a blizzard so violent the pack house windows cracked from the pressure. Helene labored for 19 hours. Richard was not pacing this time. He was in the war room with the elders, behind a closed door, and Helene could hear, between contractions, the low, controlled sound of men deciding something she had not been invited to decide. The baby came just before midnight. Helene named her Wren before anyone could suggest otherwise. Small and furious and absolutely perfect, the same way the first 2 had been. Helene held her against her chest and waited. Richard appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. He looked at the baby, then at Helene, then at the baby again. The way a man looks at paperwork that confirms news he already knew was coming, but had hoped might still be wrong. He said nothing for a long time. What he finally said was not cruel. That was almost the worst part. Cruelty she could have fought. What Richard delivered instead was the cold, administrative tone of a man who had already finished grieving something and moved into logistics. "I am going to the council in the morning," he said. "The goddess made a mistake. I intend to say so publicly." Helene looked at him, at the man who had stopped walking across a courtyard 3 years ago because she looked up from a fire. At the man whose mating ceremony had made elder wolves weep. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere between the first daughter and the third, that tears required an audience that cared. "Put Wren down before you leave," she said. He did. Gently, which somehow made it worse. Out by morning, Silver Ridge knew their Luna had been unmated. The pack stopped counting daughters. They started counting exits. Genevieve Rourke arrived at Silver Ridge on a Tuesday in March, which Helene always thought was an absurdly ordinary day for a catastrophe. She was everything the pack had been quietly asking for without saying so out loud. Tall, sharp-jawed, the daughter of a bloodline that had produced 6 consecutive male heirs across 3 generations. She walked into the pack house like she had already measured every room and found them acceptable. She shook hands with the elders first, before greeting the pack, before acknowledging Richard. And every elder shook back with the relieved energy of people who had been holding their breath for 18 months. Richard mated her quietly. No 3-day ceremony. No delegations from neighboring territories. Just paperwork and a pack announcement and the careful, administrative efficiency of a man making a correction. Helene was in the kitchen when she heard. Not because anyone told her. Because the kitchen was where she had been placed, steadily and without discussion, over the previous 4 months. First her seat at the pack table had moved. Then her access to the war room had quietly expired. Then the invitations to territory meetings had stopped arriving. Not canceled, simply not sent. Nobody announced any of this. It just happened, the way rooms get colder when someone leaves a window open, gradually and then all at once. Genevieve's first son arrived 11 months later. Alistair. Big, loud, furious from the first breath. The pack celebrated for 2 days. Richard named him at sunrise with the entire territory watching, his voice carrying across the mountain like something had been restored. The second son, Silas, came 13 months after that. More celebrations, more feasting, more of the pack founding reasons to look past Helene entirely when she entered rooms. She had become furniture, useful perhaps, but no longer seen. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, which Helene later thought was fitting. Richard had always preferred Wednesdays for difficult business. It was not long, 4 sentences, the kind of document that does enormous damage in very few words. Richard had signed it with the full formal signature. Alpha Richard Lucier of Silver Ridge. All 3 titles, which told her everything about how this had been decided. You only use all 3 titles when you want something to feel final. The outpost at the edge of the dead zone had not been inhabited for 11 years. Helene knew this because she had asked calmly the morning after the letter arrived, while Richard stood at the kitchen window, not quite looking at her. The caretaker, who had lived there last, had requested a transfer after 1 winter. He was a grown male wolf, with full pack status, and no children. He had lasted 1 winter. Richard said the cabin had been repaired. Helene looked at him for a long time. She did not ask who had repaired it, or when, or whether the repairs were the kind that would hold against a dead zone February. She had learned by then that Richard's answers to logistical questions only made her feel worse. Because they were always technically accurate and completely beside the point. She packed in one morning. 5 daughters, Isla, Clara, Wren, and the 2 younger girls Richard had stopped naming with any ceremony, stood in a line by the door with whatever fit into the bags Helene had allocated them. No one from the pack came to help. One woman from the kitchen left a wrapped bundle of food on the step without knocking. Helene picked it up on the way out, did not look back. The gates closed behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence that had taken 4 years to write. The cabin was exactly as bad as the caretaker's transfer request had implied. 1 window was boarded rather than glazed. The heating system was a wood stove that drew poorly and smoked worse. The roof held, mostly, except for a corner above what became Isla's sleeping area, which required a bucket on heavy snow nights, and a particular arrangement of blankets that Isla perfected over the first winter, with the grim pragmatism of a child who has learned that complaining changes nothing. Helene did not teach her daughters to survive. She did not have the luxury of teaching. She simply survived, visibly, every single day. And her daughters watched and did the same. Isla learned to track by following her mother through the snow at dawn, learning to read what the disturbed surface of the white said about what had passed through in the night. Clara figured out snares at 9 years old through trial and error and a particular stubbornness that reminded Helene painfully of Richard at his best. Wren, small, silent, imprecise, turned out to have an instinct for reading wind direction that the pack's most experienced hunters would have paid for had they known. Back at the main village, Alistair and Silas were being educated in the art of being above consequences. Every boundary they crossed was quietly redrawn around them. Every complaint filed against them was administratively misplaced. Richard did not encourage this, but he did not stop it either, which amounts to the same thing. A wolf who is never corrected does not become strong. It becomes something else entirely. In the dead zone, 5 daughters were learning what cold actually costs, what hunger actually requires, what it means to protect something when no one is coming to help you protect it. They were being built. Nobody at Silver Ridge noticed. Alistair threw his first pack member through a window at 16. Not metaphorically, an actual window, the glass kind. The pack member in question, a mid-ranking wolf named Corvin, who had made the mistake of questioning Alistair's hunting allocation, spent 3 days in the healing ward and then quietly requested a territory transfer, which was granted with the same administrative efficiency that had been applied to everything uncomfortable in Silver Ridge for the past decade. Richard called Alistair into the war room, spoke to him for 40 minutes behind a closed door. Alistair emerged, looking bored. Nothing changed. Silas was subtler, which was worse. He did not throw people through windows. He simply made life in Silver Ridge quietly unbearable for anyone who crossed him. Reassigned duties, withheld resources, engineered small humiliations with the patient creativity of someone who had learned early that power used slowly leaves no fingerprints. Pack members began avoiding both brothers the way you avoid a particular stretch of road after dark. Not because of one incident, because of the accumulation. Richard saw it. The pack could tell he saw it because of the particular way he stopped seeing it. The careful, deliberate quality of his not noticing, which required more effort than actual blindness would have. He had spent years building heirs. What he had built instead were 2 wolves who recognized no authority above their own appetites. Wolves who had been handed Silver Ridge like a gift and treated it like a toy. There is a particular kind of grief that belongs to people who made their disaster themselves, who chose every turning that led them here. Richard was beginning to feel it, that cold, creeping arithmetic of consequence. But he did not yet have a name for what he was feeling. He would. Soon enough. The Black Ridge Wolves arrived at the eastern border on a Thursday night, which meant someone had told them when the patrol rotation changed. There were 40 of them. Silver Ridge ran 20 on a good night. The numbers were not an accident. They were a message, and the message had been written by someone with intimate knowledge of Silver Ridge's defensive schedule, its weak points, its patrol gaps. The kind of knowledge that takes years to accumulate, the kind only a bloodline heir would carry. Richard understood what had happened approximately 4 minutes into the assault. He understood it the way you understand something you have been refusing to understand for a very long time. All at once, completely, with no remaining room for alternative explanations. His sons had sold them. Not for survival, not under duress, for a territorial arrangement that would have given Alistair the eastern grazing lands and Silas a seat on the Black Ridge Council. A business transaction. Silver Ridge. 11 generations of bloodline, everything Richard had inherited and expanded and bled for. Traded for real estate and a title. Richard fought anyway, because he was Richard Lucier, and he did not know how to stop. He took 3 wounds that should have stopped him and kept moving until the 4th one didn't allow for argument. He was on his knees in the snow when he looked up and found his sons already gone. Not retreating. Gone. Clean and deliberate. The way you leave a meeting that has reached its conclusion. The crimson spread across the white with a kind of terrible patience. Richard pressed one hand against his side and looked at the blood in the snow and understood. Finally, completely, with nothing left to soften it. Exactly what he had built. He began crawling toward the dead zone. He crawled for 2 miles before he heard them. Not howls. Footsteps. Measured, deliberate, moving through the dead zone darkness with the kind of precision that does not announce itself. Richard stopped moving and looked up and found 5 wolves arranged in a loose perimeter around him. Silent, still, watching him with the patient attention of hunters who had been tracking something for a very long time and had simply decided it was time to stop. And he did not recognize them immediately. That was the part that stayed with him longest afterward. That he looked at his own daughters, Isla, Clara, Wren, and the 2 younger girls whose naming ceremonies he had treated as administrative inconveniences, and did not know their faces, because he had stopped looking at them years ago, and faces change when nobody is watching. Isla stepped forward. She was 23. She had her mother's quality of making a room settle when she entered, except the room was a mountain in the middle of a crisis, and she was doing it anyway. "The eastern border," Richard said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. "Black Ridge, 40 wolves. We know," Isla said. "We felt the border breach 2 hours ago. They saved Silver Ridge in the space of a single night. All 5 of them, moving through the dark, with a coordination that the pack's most experienced warriors would have spent years developing. The Black Ridge wolves retreated before dawn, the territory held. Richard found Helene at the outpost door as the sun came up. She looked at him for a long time, at the wounds, at the snow on his knees. "You are no longer my alpha," she said, not with anger. Anger would have meant something still burned. She said it the way you state weather. Simply, finally, true. If your fated mate threw you and your daughters into the freezing snow, and years later those same daughters saved everything he built, would you have done what Helene did? Or would you have let Silver Ridge burn? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, you know what to do. My name is Pauline, and I'll see you in the next one.